paranormal. Folks, tonight we're going to dive back into a mystery decades old. And of course, you've seen me cover Camp Hero and the Montauk Project on this channel plenty of times, as well as other peripheral channels. But this is something that we cannot let go until we have some sort of resolve. At least in the way of personal experience, if not outwardly, for us to explore what actually happened in Camp Hero. Now, joining me tonight, folks, I have a very good friend of mine. You may know him as Montauk is Strange. I know him as Brian Minnick, and he was with me. And of course, he was with Long Island Bigfoot as well, and they actually go out into the field quite often together. But for our trip out to Long Island, it was the three of us, including Brian's wife, Danielle. And we did obviously explore Camp Hero and a lot of the other peripheral areas that have certain activity, at least purportedly. Now, I've wanted to have him on a show with us here for quite some time because Brian, essentially out of everybody that I've met, and you can throw names around surrounding this particular subject, Brian has been keeping track, keeping tabs, collecting data into archives, physical archives that he has that he can leaf through that talk all about not only the politics of the property, but the way it has progressed in way of the camps. And, there were different wars that this was associated with. He has all this documentation where they're knocking buildings down, where they're building them. It's very impressive, the amount of knowledge Brian has accumulated on the subject of Camp Hero and Montauk at large. And tonight I'd like to treat you to an interview with him to talk about just this subject, because who has this much information at their fingertips? Honestly, I can't think of one name. Peter Moon certainly knows quite a bit and has researched to the end this particular property and all of the surrounding properties there in Montauk. But in way of this physical evidence that we have in the overall process, again, of time and everything that has happened, Brian is the man to go to. Without further ado, as we love to say here, I'd like to introduce to you Brian Minnick. How you doing, Brian? Thanks for being on the show, brother. It's good to see you.
Excellent, man. Thank you for that glowing intro. I appreciate that.
I only tell what's right there on the surface. We haven't even gotten below there yet, but I think people will have a very good understanding of where you're coming from in way of this information, why you're collecting it, and why it's important that we continue to revisit this topic as the show goes on here, my friend.
I agree.
That being said, why don't you give us your take on why this is something so important to keep within our consciousness and to continue to research not only Camp Hero, but the Montauk Project at large?
Oh, definitely. Well, just the fact that everything that kind of stems from Montauk kind of spreads out into the world and becomes a thing. A lot of things we take for granted today that we know, even the internet itself, computer code, all stem from Sage Radar, which they first tested at Montauk, so on and so forth. I mean, if you pick something, you can kind of trace it back. So as far as technology goes, or advances as far as war, of course, and weaponry, but advances in science, you could trace many things back to Montauk. So in the course of digging into the history, the point was to kind of try to figure out where things are so we know where not to look, because there's legitimate structures here and there if we're trying to find the underground secret base. But in the course of doing that, we found so much good information over the years, and it's fascinating how many things that we know. And as far as conspiracies go or theories, you could really tie a lot of the technology, anything to do with mind control, microwave stuff. A lot of the theories and aliens have been sighted. I mean, UFOs. There was major UFO flaps, they call them, when there's a group of sightings at once in one area. Back in the '60s in Montauk. I mean, we have Junior, which is kind of like a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It looks like, we don't know if it was conjured up or it's something that was there. It's Native American land. I mean, every single war our country has been in has been fought there. A lot of our secret technologies were first rolled out there, like I said, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's been a lot of death and destruction there. So you start thinking of the paranormal aspect. So I mean, it's really everything rolled into one, and that's why I really love the subject, the location. It's like special place to me.
We often talk about this particular location, and of course, the Montauk Project is associated very heavily, and this is how people know the area by and large, at least in the way of public knowledge. But at the same time, we understand that prior to that endeavor, this particular area was certainly a sacred place, if not just to the Algonquin Indians, but some of the other
Absolutely.
tribes that were there as well. What are your thoughts on some of the history prior to us actually building on this site, what it might have been used for, how it might have been revered, at least in the way of indigenous spirituality?
Yeah, that's a great question because the Algonquin Indians, the Montaukets, actually, there was like 12 tribes on Long Island, and the Montaukets were in charge. They were, Chief Wendanch at one point. He made a really good union with one of the settlers that came here in the 1600s, Lionel Gardner. And when those two were like, they were like bros, and everybody on both sides of their encampments really got together, and they gave a lot of power to like the Montaukett Indians. So Chief Wendanch was like the ruler of all the Long Island Indians, and being that wampum was the currency at the time that was being adopted by the Dutch, and people were using it down as far as North Carolina for a while, for a good 100 years after they first
Hmm.
started using wampum. But so Fort Hill and Montauk, where the lighthouse is, was a giant fort. It was based on wampum creation. It was like the Fort Knox of wampum. So basically, all the currency for the Northeast for all the natives, and it was called the Triangle Trade because they would use this wampum to trade for pelts, and it would go up to Hudson Bay in Canada, upstate New York. So this huge trade was established, and more like Montauk being the like gold center of it all.
Hmm.
Of course, there was warring tribes that would come and try to take it, but they
Hmm.
had protection from the English settlers that were here uh, through Lionel Gardner to make an alliance with Chief Wendanch, which is the Montaukett chief. So this area was sacred before the people came across the ocean in the 1600s. We know other people may have came across to America, like the Irish in the year 600, the Vikings at one point. They even say the Egyptians were in Utah. So many people have came here, but the latest wave of people that came here, well, long before that, this area, Turtle Hill, where the lighthouse is, it used to go really far out, another 200 feet before the erosion kind of took the cliffs back. And now, as you know, things are falling out of the cliffs. So basically, this area was a sacred area, and they called it Turtle Hill. It was supposed to have special energies, and people had lived in this area on Long Island and in Montauk for about 10,000 years, 8,000 to 12,000 years. So basically, right after a great deluge, about 10 to 12,000 years ago or so, people were here shortly after. So it's
That's
amazing, the
incredible.
amount of history.
No, that's incredible. And of course, we have many places like that over here in the Northeast. I'm sure that even your state,
Yes.
those of you out there listening, you can find some of this indigenous residue that is still there resonating today. And of course, we're, still working with these energies in certain ways, but sometimes we're unconscious of it while building and establishing our modern civilization right on the same plot of land, which again still holds that signature. Very quickly, I wanted to say hello to Goofon. What's up, Rich? Thanks for coming to the show, guys. I see all of you in the chat. I really appreciate each and every one of you being present here tonight for this fantastic interview. I'll try to shout you out as I can, but I'll tell you right now, I see all of you. Thank you so much for being here and joining us tonight. Now, Brian, with you being so close to Montauk physically and having traversed those grounds since you were very, very young,
Yeah.
one might say there was a particular time where you started to understand that something else might have happened there in the way of the Montauk Project. And, then you may have had to consider certain things in looking at that plot of land that you had run around for, a good portion of your life.
Yeah.
How much stock, just to kind of address this particular elephant in the room, how much stock or where do you sit when it comes to the whole story of the Montauk Project, dealing with time travel, abducted children, in the way of Preston Nichols' story, along with Al Balick and Duncan Cameron, and of course Peter Moon backing this up, who, what, I think in my conversations with Peter, I think he understands that something did happen to these people. And I think as time has gone on, speaking about the three big players, Preston, Duncan, and Al, as time has gone on, I think he's become more convinced, seeing things as they unfolded, where in the beginning, he was certainly there to be a ghostwriter, and he was supposed to be
Yeah.
someone more on the outside, but sort of found himself in the middle. So again,
Yeah.
coming back to that question, where do you sit in respect to the interpretation of this particular story and what might have actually happened there?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, I've come around kind of like in a circle almost. Like I started out, when a kid, you want to get out there and explore all the crazy, stuff that you heard, and you're all into it. And then I started to realize that there's so many people out there with speculation. People will be shrugged off. So unless I took it from a different approach and try to get actual facts, start compiling stuff. I've been recording stuff since the beginning. I mean, that was one thing I wanted to do since the beginning. But when it came to like trying to prove it to other people or trying to actually make real connections or saying to myself, I don't want to believe in this if I can actually find evidence that this is not the case. I'm not going to fool myself and tell myself that it is. I want to know what really, really happened. So in the course of doing that, you're trying to like disprove yourself. I find more and more factoids that connect and kind of prove some of these things. So I kind of came in a circle trying to disprove myself, actually convincing myself more in some of these aspects. So
I think we find that element when it comes to this particular story, and the deeper that you go into it, the more things start to sort of connect. And as you mentioned before, this sort of a phenomenon spreads out spider webs across the world. It touches everybody. In fact, the whole implication behind the Montauk Project is that we were all programmed, and perhaps are still being programmed in many different ways, indirectly, perhaps through subliminal messaging, or very directly through, shooting specific frequencies aimed at groups of people or, individuals. In your evidence, or well, let me put it this way, in your archives, in your collection of things that you have put together over the years, what would you say is the most compelling bit of evidence or supportive evidence you would have that this particular project actually existed?
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess, I would really break that down by kind of like by the topic. So like if you were talking about one aspect of it, I have a piece of evidence for each one that really compels me. So, but as a grand total, like as a whole, I would say, I mean, all of it together really as a sum total is compelling, like but as far as one piece of one thing, it's hard to choose one thing, but, I think it would be some of these times finding something online that somebody said, and then actually finding something in the military history that is deep in the archives that I dug up that totally corroborates what this person said out there. And then it makes you think, that's just one example I was thinking of that I just found. It was a lady named Michelle Guerin, or Guerin. I don't know how I'm pronouncing her name wrong. Her story has been online since like 2001, when the internet really started picking up. And she talked about seeing this reptile creature in one of the bunkers. And the weird thing about that is, besides something that I experienced once, she mentioned it happened in 1970 in this particular bunker. So I'm digging through the military history, and I find out that place was closed since 1947, World War II. But then they actually came back there in that one year in 1970, and the Navy SEALs and Special Ops did a exercise in there, some kind of exercise in that year. And she described the people that abducted her basically as wearing black berets. So I looked up all the different people that wear black berets. Now I'm looking up hats and when people wear them, it's ridiculous. But I did find that in that one year, the Air Force started wearing certain parts of the Air Force that would work with other branches of the military. So say the Navy, because it was Air Force property and the Navy was in there. So these people would be there, and they were wearing that color hat in that year. So, I mean, all these things, like 3 or 4 factoids lined up to kind of give this thing I read online. This is just like a random example of many things that I researched, but I'll do a video on it someday, but I figured, this proves kind of that this lady, if she made this up, it would be really, it would be very rare for somebody to like beat those statistics to actually name all those things.
Yeah, and when you look at some of these incredible stories, and we can even refer to some of these other voices that are out there right now in way of secret government programs, coming from Earth, maybe stopping at the moon for a spell, switching bodies, going out to Mars, fighting wars. I mean, we could name a handful of people who have spoken like this. Now, a lot of these, put that person in a very heroic point in that story. They're the survivor.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a victim, but in the end, they're the hero. Now, when you take somebody like, let's say, Preston Nichols, and I like to refer to him quite often because the guy was very loquacious,
Yeah.
especially when it came to this topic. He never really shied away from speaking about it or trying to impart some other detail that he had recalled within his own meditations and studies and so forth. And I'm going to refer to a specific part of this project in the process, okay? That if you were to say this aloud and say that you were the person doing this or you were involved in one way or another,
Hmm.
it's pretty fucked up, okay?
Yeah. Yes.
And that is how Preston claimed they were programming some of these boys, and they were
Yeah.
doing it through sexuality. It was sex magic at its core because there was obviously a ritualistic fashion behind it. We understand that there are shadow governments, or at least groups of people who do subscribe to the more satanic end of things. It's been around for a very long time. So again, this is another one of those little elements that sort of fits directly into possibly the reality in the whole setup of the project itself, right?
Yeah.
So he's going around telling people that this is how he programmed kids, and he described it to the point of orgasm. The
Yeah.
energy, the Kundalini energy, and that's a
Yep.
big point of it. Okay, and this is the energy that literally sits in your root chakra at the base of your spine. It
Yep.
pretty much lays dormant until you decide to wake it, or some event in life that is incredibly impactful and purposeful in this way will alight this. But it will actually bring in different energy and consciousness. But long story short, the sexual energy as you have orgasm does come up this channel. And usually, for the majority of us, it rises up the stomach, into the chest, goes through the throat, where you get the vocal stuff, right? Goes to the top of the head, and poof, out the top. Now, there have been many monk-like established cultures who have certainly witnessed this and observed this particular energy leaving the body. And this is why they have dubbed the orgasm little death. Okay, because
Yeah,
they
little
believe
death.
that
I've heard-
core essence of
like-
energy would leave, and that's it. It'd be gone forever, and you'd never get it back. Of course, there are other thoughts that Egyptians were able to channel this and bring it back
Yeah.
and make the Ankh within their bodily structure. We talk about the sacred geometry, and this is the flow. But I'm getting back to where I started. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So, long story short, there is a huge science that goes behind this sex magic in certain respects, and it was obviously, at least the way that Preston was reporting, used at the Montauk Project. Why would you incriminate yourself to such a degree?
Yeah.
You could have omitted that part of the story and said
Yeah.
everything else happened and just not talked about it. I mean, there were
It's almost
thoughts
like-
of, go ahead.
It's almost like he thought that was okay in some way to say it the way that he did. Some people would cringe half the time, and I guess he thought it was okay to say that, but I don't know. He didn't perceive. He was very awkward socially. That was one thing, and also, but I mean that I believe that it's possible. I always thought too. I don't know what they did or when, but I don't know if people moved in after the base closed, because there was a good 3 or 4 years where it was not even caretaker there. After 1983 to about the time that I went in 1987 and climbed through the one bunker as a kid, there was nobody there at all, and everything was abandoned in really nice shape. So who's to say that people with dark things in mind didn't set up shop in there with a small operation? It's not impossible that it wasn't connected to like a branch of our government. There were things that our government did there, obviously top secret, but they were more in the line of real, things that you would normally think of, things that are not even secret today, like radar was secret at first, so on and so forth. So secret things were done there. But as far as that stuff, yeah, it's almost cultish in a sense. And
Yes.
like you said, I've seen stuff there too, where people definitely have met after hours on grounds. And there's been some stuff. There was something on one of the pieces of footage on one of my earlier videos that nobody picked up on the tunnel floor. I'm just going to leave it at that until somebody sees it. But it goes along the line of what you're saying, that people go in there at night and do things. And you don't want to bump into them, I'm sure.
I wouldn't be surprised. Not
Yeah.
in the least, especially if that particular area is known to be sacred. I'm sure people who use earth energies, Wiccans, pagans, and so forth, those who are very in tune to
Yeah.
nature would subscribe to that. But then again, there is the darker side of ourselves, and there are groups of people who will go out there and try to manipulate and augment that energy and use it for their own purpose. Now, with
Yeah.
that in mind, I will bring up a specific entity that we've spoken about very often. But before I do that, I understand that you have a premiere coming out tomorrow. And you had mentioned that the woman you had spoken to, Michelle, I forget the last name
Yes.
you said.
Michelle Gearin. I never met her, but I've been reading her thing over and over
Oh,
for
I'm sorry.
years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but she also had claimed to see a reptilian being on the site, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your premiere about?
Okay, so the premiere it's the first premiere I'm ever doing, so I almost botched it before and I put it up for a minute. Somebody might have watched it, but it's basically I've taken I call them field reports in this sense, but basically every visit to the base, every exploration I've ever done, we've taken notes, wrote down, a basic couple paragraphs, all kinds of info, gathered pictures and video of each time. So now we're up to like almost 50 field reports. And I wanted to start, I'm writing them up, and I wanted to start reading them and putting some of them on the channel. So the very first time we went to the base, thank you very much, read as my special guest narrator, first field report. And it's our 50th video, just happens to be a 50th video and first premiere. So I figured I'd put it up tomorrow. And in this, field report, we didn't know we were going to a military base. We're just riding our bikes. We went straight to this bunker somehow, and we saw a hole in it. So what did? We went right into it, crawled in, and in this bunker, one thing, well, the first part of it, I saw something like I pictured seeing us walk past the hallway through something else's eyes, but at the same time, I could also see what that thing looked like, and it looked like this kind of reptilian thing with a tail and so on and so forth. And I imagined it being very weak and it wanted to like drain our energy, but it couldn't, muster up any energy. And I thought to myself, that's kind of crazy. It was all in like a split second, and I'm in a total dark. We didn't have flashlights. So I just chalked it up to crazy imagination like I have. So we just kept walking. And then later on, we saw this giant hole in the floor, and it went from wall to wall. So there's no way to go over it unless we crossed over this small little piece of rebar sticking out of the side that connected to the tunnel wall. And we actually walked over this thing. The wind was blowing out, and we realized it was deep, but we didn't, we were really stupid at the time. We crossed over it, like barely made it over this thing. And then on the other side, we decided to check how deep it is by dropping one of the pieces of chunk of concrete down there. And it fell for a few seconds, like good 3 seconds before it hit water. And you could hear like an echo. So there were cement walls, and it was flooded. And long story short, if the fall didn't kill us, I don't think anybody would be able to get us out of there or even know we fell in. So it seemed like something we could have, assured death. So we didn't want to cross back over it. And we found our way through the dark and found some light coming at us, and we climbed up a hill of sand and came out right onto the beach out of a little hole. And so that I said, wow, there's this military, bunker there or something from World War II. And it always stuck in my mind that this place existed, but I had forgot about it until years later. Somebody told me about it. And then I forgot about it again. And then the book came out, and somebody said, oh, you have to read this book. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, it was out there in one of these underground things. But I couldn't get any of my friends to be interested in it at first. They would just go straight for the radar every time. So this video is basically explaining the very first time we found our way into a bunker, onto the base at all, and luckily into one of the bunkers that I don't know any other person that's ever been in this bunker. I've never read a thing online, not one report. And I've been trying to find out my whole life, basically searching for anybody else who's been in there or saw this giant hole, and looking in the history to what it might have caused a hole like that in a bomb-proof bunker. Like I don't even think C4 could blow a hole like that. So I don't know what could have done that.
Well, we know for sure that they had flooded. They flooded a lot of the underground, at least in the way of the secret parts of the base. At least that's what's been told to us. So that would, kind of make sense if there was something in the way of getting down there or making an opening big enough to start, pouring water in or flooding it. If anybody wants to do the quick math out there, the feet that this rock had dropped, if it's free falling for 3 seconds, you can give us an estimate. That would be interesting. I'll do it after the show if I don't see it in here, because that's a very curious thing, just to get an idea, an estimate of how far down this actually went. Now, I think that it's very interesting, because obviously at that age, not reading the book or know anything about what may have happened there, you didn't have any real context in which to base your experience of, believing that
Yeah.
you saw something there and then had the feeling that you're describing. And that's very succinct. That's incredibly particular in way of
Yeah.
experience. Most people would say, oh, it was a shadow figure, it was ominous, or I felt dread, or something like that. But you have a very, again, direct experience that you're
Yeah.
recalling. And with that in mind, we also understand in way of the story that there were extraterrestrial beings or interdimensional beings too that were a part of this, and they were messing with different levels. And of course, that particular area, I mean, we
Yeah.
don't know what sort of signature they actually left there energetically with the portals that had been open for certain times, sometimes
Yeah.
sustained in way of activity. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you might actually have seen something that's still existing there and sort of cannot die. You know, at least
Yeah.
a quick and imminent death. It's something that might just fade out the way that, you know, the sun does in the evening, takes its
Sure.
time, eventually it
That's
goes.
interesting.
But that is
Very
very
interesting.
curious, you
Yeah.
know.
It's
Are you, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just you. I didn't have anything particular.
Well,
I
in
was just
walking Camp Hero as well, I mean, there
yeah.
is one particular road, Rough Riders Road,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a whole history behind the Rough Riders, and I don't think many people realize how close it is in respect to Montauk and Camp Hero. I think they've heard about it, but never
Yeah.
really had a location. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the Rough Riders and what that road may have represented that's, you know, within the thick of Camp Hero?
Yeah, sure. That's just this one road, and I actually found a picture of what it looked like at first. When we first found it, it was just this path overgrown to the point where you had to basically crawl or walk, scrouched over to get through this thing. They've since cleared it out, and then I've since learned a lot about it. But like Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, basically the first veterans of foreign wars, like even the first VFW came from Montauk, like I was saying, everything come from Montauk, the first Red Cross, and they were formed in this when in 1898 they came back from the Spanish American War, and it was like a quarantine camp because everybody had Spanish flu, yellow fever, malaria, and they have like a lot of tents, hospital tents, and everything. And Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders were like the elite kind of group, almost like the special forces kind of, where they're on horses and they'd take them every day down and like jump in the ocean. And anyway, so he was very interested in Montauk, and he actually had land. I found out on Rough Riders Road somewhere there, so that's why they partially named that after him. And on that road, like we hadn't gone back in a very long time to Montauk, and then started going again after like some of the shows, and then basically we went in this since we started YouTube. Basically, we went with my cousins first, and on that very day, the first day we went back, as soon as we pulled in right by Rough Riders Road by the like one of the entrance gates, I actually saw something run across the road like a really dark, almost like a shadow in the daytime. It was really dark and it was tall and it just went really fast across the road. So I said to my cousin, speed up. And we looked, for some trees moving and there was nothing. I figured maybe, they were saying it was a deer, but something about it, I knew that it was like something else. Later that day, we're videotaping. We found like this old Canon pedestal. And in the background, I didn't see it when we were taping, but when I got home, there's a certain tree there. We walked past it. There's nothing behind it. And it has a branch snapped almost like a blind. And then a few minutes later, there's this huge like head and shoulder silhouette right behind that blind. You could almost see like ears, and I think I see like a snout and eyes. I'm not sure, but I put it next to the picture of Junior from the book because I didn't know what it was, and I thought you have to be extremely lucky to catch anything. And that was like our first day there, and I haven't seen anything since, obviously, like that. So I think we were really lucky that day. And I went back recently, stood on the same exact spot, and filmed the same exact tree, and there's no giant black shadow there. You can see there's just regular woods behind it. So I just wanted to show that it's very out of, that it's an anomaly of really dark area on the video. So that road, there's something about it. I mean, there's a cannon structure. So there was something from the Revolutionary War there, most likely to fire at ships, and I found records that they did do that. So, I mean, we're talking hundreds of years of history on this road. And also there's something around that area, not off that road. It's close though, and it looks like a Native American burial mound that's about 50 feet tall. And at the top of this mound, there's a capstone of cobblestones, almost like a capstone on a pyramid. It's like a whole bunch of cobblestones, hundreds of them, but they coat the top of the hill kind of. And we were thinking that's some kind of sacred place as well for the Native Americans. And so we didn't want to point out exactly where that was so everybody doesn't go there.
Right.
But that area, there's something old and special about it. So I think it's a good place to go back and check out.
Certainly, and the
Yeah,
next time I come down and visit, I would like to see that because I know,
definitely.
Camp Hero is so vast, and we
It
wanted to
is.
cover, all these different areas. I had a few that I wanted to visit myself, and, with
Yeah,
sunlight quickly dwindling, we had to
yeah,
make executive decisions about where we were able to visit. So certainly,
that's right.
the next round, we'll go back and, you guys will
Yeah,
see us down there on Rough Riders Road, and, hopefully we'll have some of those feelings and have some sort of experience while we're there.
yeah,
Um, you know, Obviously, again, we're talking about the anomalies that are surrounding the tip of Long Island there, and
yeah,
it goes without saying that there is one very predominant entity that possibly may still be on the grounds today, and that is someone we've discussed at length about, and this is Junior.
yeah,
So, for those of you who don't know, very quickly, I'm just going to mention Junior was a particular entity created by either the consciousness or subconscious of Duncan Cameron in way to sabotage the Montauk Project as his ticket out of the project. Uh, Essentially, a trigger word was mentioned. He had been programmed prior to. When he did this, the idea was that it would show up in the underground and destroy the underground, but instead, it showed up somewhere on the top, somewhere on the base, and just started destroying and basically eating everything that it could see, consuming it in whatever sort of way you'd like to put that together. Now, at one point, when the power was cut, or all of this sort of started to wane in way of activity, this particular entity froze just over by battery 216. He's up to the top left. You guys have seen the pictures on this show and other shows. So, in way of this entity still being there, what are your thoughts about Junior at large? I know we talked about it a bit on Long Island Bigfoot show, but it's been some time, and I know I see some new faces here we didn't have present in that moment.
yeah. At first, like, I thought it was, as part of the book, I almost thought it was just, something that was conjured up, not quite a Sasquatch, or, then later on, I started thinking, like that circle I went through of thought, like I started thinking, it's kind of, maybe they just made it up for the book. And then, now that I've gone back there, I was just talking to Mike Long Island Bigfoot, for a couple months before I started the channel, just about really looking at the stuff he was finding. So I was paying good attention to what on his videos. And then when I got there that same day, I noticed all these structures that he was pointing out in his video near Rough Riders Road in that area. I mean, there was all kinds of V structures. There was there was little nests, all kinds of snaps and breaks, and we found glyphs everywhere on the ground. I mean, I
Hmm.
was missing a lot of them. They were finding them. And so that got me thinking, maybe there is something to this. And maybe I started thinking differently about Junior at that point. Maybe it's not 100% that he created or conjured him up. Maybe he just opened a door and he just came through. Or maybe, if Sasquatch had been there the whole time with the Native Americans, maybe they're right there somewhere, right, very close. And maybe what he did was tear something open and let it in, like against its will, basically. Like if it wanted to come through,
Hmm.
it could. But he kind of like opened a door and it just kind of fell through. And who knows? I started thinking of other possibilities, basically. I really don't know, but I believe more in it now than I did even a year ago. Because since I last made that visit, it's, I start following the evidence and there's a lot of questions. So I tend to
Well,
think that, there could be more than one, too.
it's possible. I mean, one
Yeah.
of the things that Duncan had mentioned, and you'll find this in the interviews, guys, if you go and listen to the very rare appearances that he did make in way of media, that he wasn't even to the day that he was talking sure that this was actually something that had come from his subconsciousness directly. He thought,
Wow.
as Brian's saying, possibly he accessed something else while undergoing that endeavor of pulling something out of himself. And it was sort of just automatic. It just kind of fell right into that energy. And next thing you know, here's this, 9, 10, 15-foot tall creature bounding around the woods in Camp Hero, smashing and breaking and eating everything. It's a fantastic story, but the fact that we have a picture or two of this
Yeah.
particular being is just incredible. And when you see it, you can tell that it doesn't look entirely solid. There are parts of it within the outline that are translucent. Possibly this has to do with the photography. at the time it was obviously an analog film. We
Yeah.
could, look in ways of that. But with this being said, normally you're not catching some of the image behind the figure, even in this way. I mean, if anything, I would think it would be very minimal in way of that perimeter or the aura, if you will, of the being.
Yeah.
But sure enough, we see this thing here, and technically it's still there. I mean, that's another thing, not realizing while we were climbing up Battery 216 how very close the Junior had been right to the left of us.
Yeah.
I would have gotten a little bit closer, but I didn't feel anything in the way of a presence up in that
Me
area.
neither.
And you didn't either as well. So, I
No.
mean, maybe it's certain times a year where the veil is thinner because, again, they're using all sorts of work with technology and so forth. Now, one of the interesting things that I'll point out here is a story that Peter Moon had told both of us while we were riding in the car through Camp Hero, and that
Yeah.
was a time where he had found, or stumbled upon, I should say, going through the park, an entire lot of dead deer that
Oh yeah.
really had some very interesting anomalies about the carcasses. One being that the
Yeah.
hair was growing out of the bones.
Yeah.
Others looked like they were dropped from a high, place and just splattered, on the ground.
That's
Others had very odd breaks in the way that their limbs were. I mean, if it's a vortex and something else comes through, I mean, we've heard of many places like this, but why
yeah.
Camp Hero still today?
Yeah, I think places where people manipulate high energy can, obviously that's what they were aiming for, is to
Mhm.
use a lot of energy to tear something open and to make a rift in time and space. It always takes a huge amount of energy. So maybe, in places where people have attempted this, I could see there being problems, like something that just keeps tearing open, almost like anything, like a leaking pipe. But that's one thing that I was thinking. Two is the amount of UFOs that have been seen at Montauk is off the
Mhm.
chain. I mean, one of them made it all the way to the White House when they first started. The Cold War first started because they thought it was a Russian bomber of high technology, and they sent Montauk radar picked it up. They had it sent to the White House. By the time each radar passed it along, it was across the U.S. in like a few minutes time. And then I have a couple others that made it right to the White House. And then in 1961, there was about 14, 15 sightings in East Hampton and Montauk. And these are from either groups of people in mass or single people. Even like, I guess my mother was out here from New York City at the time as like a summer kid. And she even remembers it. She had told me about it earlier before I ever knew about any of this stuff. So
Mhm.
I started picking her brain on it. I'm writing down. I'm gathering them all up, and I'm going to make a video on it because it's just so many in that one time. And it's funny that year is when they started discussing turning the old part of like Battery 216 that we were talking about.
Mhm.
The Army was going to come back for a third time and turn that into a Nike missile base, which is a small nuclear missiles they fire at groups of planes that blow up planes. So they were actually building that at Camp Hero and, working on building it there. And that's when all the UFOs were coming in that same year, which we've heard before how they've gone and shut down, silos and so on and so forth. So I thought that was a little coincidental. But so the deer, being dropped from a high place, that crossed my mind right away. Hair growing out of the bones, that sounds like irradiation. Kind of like Daniel mentioned Skinwalker Ranch on the video to Peter Moon at that moment. And, all those things crossed my mind. And one of the things, you said about time travel and, opening rifts and portals, they always require a lot of energy. And on one of the shows, they asked me, do you think it's possible? And I said you would need a tremendous amount of energy. And thank God later on they had Michio Kaku on, and he said the same thing, thank God backing it up. But then Joe Lafredo pointed out something, Lafreno, I'm sorry. He pointed out that something about using people as batteries,
Mhm.
almost like that's what his take on it was. And I thought about that, and I saw something about the amount of calories that each cell has recently, and it was like a tremendous amount of energy, potential energy in each cell that we have. So technically, we could be a battery of sorts. It's not off the table that a power source, we could be a better power source than anything we have, technology wise. So you kind of take everything and mash it together and take, the good things out of it and try to piece it together. That's how I do it, at least, is, there's a grain of truth in everything. And yeah, some people are, embellishing things or not remembering them. And
Mhm.
even myself, I mean, I'm talking about stuff from 1987. I'm sure there's a few things that I've maybe mixed up or something. But the point is when you combine it all together and you take the very good points and you start connecting things, then you could kind of see there's like this true frame of a truth somewhere in there. And I do think there's a lot going on there, more than one thing. So who
As
knows what
most
the
of
deer were?
as most of the survivors have said, it's not that they just get a flood of memories and some sort of download, awakening, nothing like that. It's little
Yeah,
peripheral memories that come in, and then they look at that, they say, "Wait, what is that?" And all of a sudden, it'll connect to something else, and
yeah,
excuse me, and then connect to another place. So it's then up to them to sort of construct the reality. And I think Preston had talked about this in many different ways when he was giving his brand of the story. And there were certain points that all three men didn't necessarily agree on certain aspects of the story. They all had a
yeah,
different interpretation. Now, that could be in way of the memory, the recollection. It's imperfect. I mean, whatever was done to erase their memories had some sort of efficiency up to a certain point,
yeah.
clearly, because these men still went to their graves with many questions, I would
And
say,
side effects.
and side effects. And that's another
Yeah.
thing I wanted to point out, too. I don't think I've met one person who's been associated with this project physically here in this lifetime
Hmm.
who hasn't incurred some sort of physical affect in a very negative way to their mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and physical health. Duncan
Yeah.
Cameron being an incredible example of that. I mean, Drunvalo Melchizedek, the one who brought us the Merkaba meditation, he is really a certain grandfather of sacred geometry.
Oh, wow.
He did try to help Duncan many times, and even Peter Moon and I spoke about this a bit. And
Oh,
unfortunately, Duncan was so in shambles
yeah.
that he
Yeah.
literally could not be reconstructed. His arc field was so upside down, backwards, inside out, that
Wow.
Drunvalo at certain points couldn't get physically close to him because the fields were clashing together. And whether it was uncomfortable, painful, or an actual resistance in the way of polarity, I don't know. But
Wow.
even, again, Peter Moon had corroborated this, backed this up, and said, yeah, there were plenty of times he attempted to, but just nobody could reach him, unfortunately.
Wow.
Again, just amazing that this is the
Yeah.
case. Now, it
If he
roots
couldn't,
back. Yep, go ahead.
no, I've said if he couldn't do it, I mean, I don't know who could.
That's
One of
kind
the
of the way
people.
I thought about
Yeah.
it, and I think that was sort of the underlying sentiment when I was speaking with Peter. It was just sort
Wow.
of a lost cause.
Yeah.
Um, Now, again, this all comes back to the radar tower, which I understand they were not only practicing with certain people who were on the base unwittingly in most cases, they were also practicing on the population outside of that particular town and within the town.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the SAGE radar system there, and just understanding, guys, this is the last SAGE radar system standing in the world. I
Yeah.
think there was one over in France at one point, but this is the last one that's still here.
Yeah. So it was a huge jump in technology. I mean, basically, the ARPANET was the first internet, but they took that actually from the SAGE system. So when before SAGE, they basically had to call up basically call out people, fighter jets, to defend when other jets would come. They would have to do everything manually. They actually had manual computers that were, they call them computers, but they look like the inside of a clock. I mean, they were like analog computers, which is pretty amazing. But at some point, obviously, that wasn't going to fly. And as technology got more advanced, they had to find better ways to find out who's coming farther off. And when Sage was developed, they had something called the Cape Cod system, and Montauk was part of that. And that was like one of the very first of many things, like light pens, keyboards, and that's by finding all that out. They said how much equipment was required for it, like one floor of air conditioners, one floor of generators, so on and so forth. And I saw at Montauk there's no space for that except for this one building that was built in that year. And that I found out all the underground construction for that. That's like a 4-story deep building that was secret at the time. And basically, they developed that. Then it turned into experimental SAGE system, which was ESS. And then finally, this was all done at Montauk and a few other sites. And then they finally rolled out SAGE in like 1958. And from there, that was like the leading, they tied all the radars in the United States together, and they used computer code. It was the very first computer code. They did like 58 lines of code for each command. And then they had to like send these things to telephones and print out. It was this huge elaborate operation, and they had whole floors of like vacuum tube computers that now would fit inside of a calculator. So I mean, it's huge amount of, uh, you know, the jumps we've made since then are just phenomenal. But this at the time, this was like, top of the line technology. So basically, one of the many things, like I was saying, Montauk was it was the second radar unit built, but it was the first one put out there for use. So when they actually turned it on, they found out, oh no, this is doing this and this and this. It's interrupting the TV and the radio signals in people's homes every 10 seconds. And that's what they said was the biggest problem. But I feel like there were other problems too. They took the radar out of service for a whole year after they turned it on. They realized it was causing all kinds of issues with people's minds too, I believe. That's when they started noticing, because there's something they knew about that was published that same year that they took the radar offline. It's called the Frey effect. It's when you beam microwaves towards people and you could hear either a click, a buzzing, a chirp, or, it's like 4 sounds. And that's called the Frey effect. And they wrote that paper in 1961. The guy actually was in contact with some of these people in MIT who basically developed SAGE. Long story short, so they noticed right off the bat that radio frequency and microwaves were rattling people's heads and that's when they started figuring out you could put voice in somebody's head with voice to skull, or, so on and so forth, which there's patents for. Other countries use for advertising, like Coke machine in Japan you walk past, and that's the long rumor of that. I can't find very good evidence on that, but so we know this has been an idea for a long time. But these things were kind of figured out and cataloged at Montauk. So they took it offline for a whole year. In that year, there was some shady stuff going on, and this house appeared with psychedelic wallpaper. It's because nothing was going on there, and they had a year to do anything they wanted. And then when they turned it back on, they brought civilians in for 3 years, and then they kicked them out before they were going to build the Nike base. So it's like they were doing things also to kind of cover up. Like they did something top secret, then they'd bring in civilians, like, oh, everybody's just allowed to come in. Then they kicked them out. So they did this thing in waves, like different projects. And SAGE is amazing when you read about it, basically, because computers themselves, everything we're doing right now on YouTube, it wouldn't be there if it weren't for SAGE. We wouldn't be online talking.
You're absolutely right. And that's another one of the incredible things about Montauk, how much of this originated there. I mean, when we were driving around, you had shown me the first radio tower that had transmitted. And, that was incredible to see.
Tower. Yep.
Yes. And, the history behind that, I mean, it's right here in the backyard of where we live, essentially, stone's throw away from me and certainly closer to you. It's very curious to me still today. And I don't. There must be an explanation for this, that the SAGE radar system, the way they had it, was formed to broadcast 420 megahertz to 460 megahertz, which just so happens to be the same range of frequencies that we talk about when it comes to mind control. So yes, while they were empirically experimenting with these frequencies, and they were shooting, microwave beams at certain subjects, Duncan being one of those people, obviously there were some very deleterious effects. People had burned inside, started cooking. They would just take these that didn't make it and kick them aside like old pair of shoes, put somebody new in the seat and crank it up another frequency and see what happens, record it. It's just curious that, again, that's the range of the SAGE radar. Is there a reason that you know of that the SAGE radar is programmed to, transmit 420 to 460? Are there other frequencies within, these radar systems that are utilized as well?
What I understand is like they found that out by accident because the radar was made for frequency diversity. So it would like oscillate between a low and high frequency. So it couldn't be jammed. It couldn't be detected. And so basically the thing that Peter had mentioned, the Thyrotron, that's like a pulse modulator that basically all it does is just it lets the frequency oscillate through different frequencies. So when it kept hitting across the frequency that the human mind is on, every time it oscillated, it hits it twice. And every time it's pinging off that or crossing over it, or maybe, I don't know how fast the oscillation was, but maybe when they, like you said, they were cataloging things. So if this, slight variation makes people agitated, and this one makes them, subdued, and this one makes them joyful, and this one makes them angry. If I found that stuff, I mean, scientists did right off the bat, they would start cataloging that stuff, just taking note of what frequencies do what. And so it could be better, it could be fine-tuned at some point. Or I don't think they were thinking they would fine-tune it. They probably just wrote it down. And then somebody else came along and said, we could use this for something evil. But yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
mean, I don't know if they knew ahead of time when they built it because it did go through all the frequencies. So I think they kind of discovered it by accident, and that's when they turned off the radar for a good year. So if it was so important to put into service right away, I think the discovery that they made by accident was more important because they turned the radar off for a whole entire year after they just built it. So
well, it
something must have
makes
been important enough to turn it off.
that certainly makes sense, and they wanted to explore that more. But understanding they had something significant in their hands, they just didn't realize
Yeah,
exactly what it was as of yet. I'm sorry, Aaron Morrison. Thank you so much for the $3 super sticker. I'm
very
very
nice.
engrossed in the conversation here with Brian, and although I've seen it, I keep meaning to go back. Something comes up, so I'm sorry it took me so long to get to you. Aaron Morrison, thank you once again for $3 super sticker. I do appreciate all of the support you guys provide here on the show. It keeps us going. That's the long and short of it. That's the reality. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Very nice.
I'm trying to look for a picture of the Delta T antenna because you can't talk about the Sage radar projecting these frequencies and being able to manipulate some of these oscillations unless you talk about the Delta T antenna, which really was the heart of this operation. Apparently, this was a construct, for those of you who are not familiar, that Preston Nichols developed, wherein it had esoteric properties along with the physical properties. It was a quantum device that had an enormous amount of power. Now, here's one thing I want to point out to you guys when I show this to you. Okay, pull this up here. This is just a rendition of it. I can't find the exact picture right now. There are a handful of them out there on the internet because Preston had actually built smaller models of this. Okay, so here we have almost a tetrahedral, position, but they're essentially two four-sided pyramids upside down on each other. Now, in respect to the tetrahedron in the third-dimensional scale, this is the Merkaba. Okay, this is the core geometry that we have, and what essentially happens during the Merkaba meditation is that right now your tetrahedrons are locked. Okay, they're supposed to be moving. Maybe a long time ago, at some point in history, they did move, but what ended up happening is they got stuck. Now we need to reactivate it. So what happens is that you get these things spinning counterclockwise to each other, or counter to each other, I should say, and this creates a certain pull or draw into the fields from the poles, and then meets at the center. And from that point, there's much more that goes into it. But the significance here is the geometry to me. Looking at the Delta T antenna, seeing these triangular formations, understanding the geometry again behind that in way of sacred esotericism. What are your thoughts on the Delta T antenna, which apparently sat just underneath the Sage radar, and where do you think it might be today?
Yeah, the
Because it
Delta
was
T.
big.
That is, yeah. I think you showed me a diagram of. Did you show it to me, or I think I saw it? I might even have it, but there's a diagram of somebody made the Delta T under the radar, and it's like a black and white diagram. But I also have the picture of the one Preston built in his yard. I think it's in like the appendix in one of his books, in Peter's books. So I was just checking to see if I could find it real quick. I think that it's interesting, the star tetrahedron shape. I mean, that's, like you said, the Merkaba and many other things like
I'll look
inside
too
of
here.
each. Yeah, the all of the planets in our solar system, or probably in the galaxy really, because most of them are the same, but they all at 19.7 degrees latitude all have the top of a star tetrahedron. It's like an upwelling of energy. So like the big storm on Jupiter is at 19.7 degrees, like Hawaii's volcano, Olympus Mons on Mars, the biggest volcano in the solar system, and Neptune's big blue spot, they're all at 19.7, which is the top of that same shape. So inside of every sphere, like every planet, is a star tetrahedron. So I think that's really interesting that that's the actual shape having to do with time travel. I mean, I don't understand the technology, but somehow shapes and geometry are more complex than wires and electronics as we know them. The old technology having to do with simple shapes. I mean, something about it is more to it than just. And what pyramid means is fire within. So two pyramids upside down from each other are the same shape.
And just to kind of point this out, these are energies and geometries we've been using intrinsically for many years. They've always been a part of us. So to find some sort of correlation between sacred geometry and a structure that purportedly helped to power the Sage radar in way of, mind control, or had helped open portals, using the chair that was hooked up to this thing as well. There was an intricate system of mechanics that went into this, and a lot having to do with the properties of vacuum tubes. That's a huge part of the technology. And in this book here, I'm just going to show you something interesting, because some of you guys don't have the book. I hope you can see this. This is a picture of a subject sitting in the Montauk chair. Okay, and this is, on the side here, you have all the equipment and the receivers and transmitters that the rooms were essentially lined with. And you can even see the remnants of these particular pieces of equipment that were in Preston's possession much after things had gone awry and he started to speak out. He still had, he had gathered some of this equipment. He went back after, things had settled down some years later. And because nobody else was up there and nobody seemed to care, he just took all this shit. Anything that he could carry, he took it out. This is, very quickly, and this I actually took some time to understand this a little bit. This is a picture of the subject in the chair. This is how the electricity or the energy is going to work within this and how it's going to create these fields. So you have these different loops that create their own energetic field in certain ways. Again, there's a lot that goes into this. I don't have time to explain it all at the moment, but maybe I'll do a video on it in the future. But this is the actual configuration in its simplified form, the flow pattern for this electricity and how it worked within the Montauk chair. Where do you think the Delta T antenna could be today? Do you think it's still underneath in the ground, possibly flooded out? Or do you think maybe it was deconstructed at some point? I mean, everybody sort of evacuated with such haste. I don't really know what might have become. What's your thoughts on that?
I think if they evacuated and the site was left, and it really they're coils, so the materials are really just going to be copper, and some other structural materials. So if they weren't going to recycle them like they did to like the big guns at Montauk, they were recycling everything. But I don't think that would be more work, it sounds like, than what they would get back. So I think really they probably left anything like that there, especially just a copper construct of coils shaped, a shape made out of copper. I don't think anybody would realize what they were looking at if they came across it. And I don't think, we know nobody can get to it. So the way they left everything else in place, I mean, some stuff's definitely valuable. In fact, that one computer room that's still there that I taped the inside of, I'm going to put it up at some point, but there's all kinds of old stuff that's collectible in there worth a fortune. But I think they just left everything in place pretty much. And I never found out how you would get under the Sage Tower. Still, there's one video we have where there's the side of the Sage radar is open. It's like a trench and it's filled with water. And I've seen similar trenches where you walk to the end and there's a door on the right. So it's like you go down steps, walk on a short, trench, and then there's a door. That's what I thought it could be. Other than that, I have no clue why that would be there. But we went there 2 weeks later and the whole thing was filled over with pavement like it was never there. So I put the two next to each other, and I think that could be one of the entrances. But I don't know how they would get all the equipment downstairs. I mean, they have to be entering from somewhere else because there has to be a freight elevator somewhere. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
There were multiple entrances from what I understand, and even some of the bunkers, certainly had entrances. The Battery 216, again, from my interpretation and from my recollection, if you will, I remember them driving vehicles into that bunker. I mean, whether they were carrying supplies or other things, I really don't recall, but I distinctly have an image in my mind wherein, it's almost like those old-timey Jeeps, the Army Jeeps, moving in.
Exactly. And they did drive those in there. Yep.
Okay, see, I have nothing to corroborate that with other than the image that I have in my head, that recollection. So to hear you say that's what they did,
there's
it's
even
pretty
a
interesting.
Sign. There's a sign in in I think it's Battery 113, but there's a sign before you enter the tunnel about filling up with gas before you go into the tunnel or something like that. So they were definitely driving in certain parts. I mean, they're big enough. You could clearly drive a car through there.
Well, it also plays in the way of the gunmetal gray doors that may have been there, and I think we talked about that a little bit. But again, that sort of came from another recollection where I remember these big heavy doors. We've talked about it before. They either swung like this, or there was one slab that swung out like this on a pivot, and they were gunmetal gray. And at one point, you said that they did have certain doors on the bunkers that were gunmetal gray, correct?
Yeah, they camouflaged a lot of the stuff. So if it wasn't being painted like the foliage or the rocks, they were painting it like a house, like painting windows and flower boxes on it. So everything was camouflaged there, including natural like gray and green, like normal camo. But they went as far as to build like the gym into a church, and they have one like lookout position that's a windmill, so on and so forth. So they did some pretty elaborate like disguising for the whole base. The air raids were a thing.
My curiosity here is that there are a lot of people who claim to have these recollections of certain areas within the base that had, either buildings or their entrances or they went down. And yet maybe there's nothing physically there. But then we look into the history a little bit. I mean, the actual solid history of it.
Yeah.
And we find there was architecture on that particular spot, and it does match their recollection. So what the hell does that mean?
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's one of the things that's got me really interested in it, like things I almost wrote off, and then I see something and I'm like, it's coming from a legitimate place. It brings that thing right back into it, and that's something I almost put on the side. It brings it right back into the fold.
It's weird too, because these memories are almost like the faintest voice in your mind. Like you could totally just overlook this, or sometimes the memory will bleed into something more modern that you could obviously place in your life and just gets distorted. But that one moment or two moments that you actually have to hear it with certain clarity, if you turn your direction, you find that you're simply looking outside of the structure that you understand in way of your own paradigm. There's something else there. And the driving madness that at least I've experienced, and I'm sure other people who are associated with this in one way or another have felt as well, is that it only allows you to go to a certain point. So it's much like if I see the book is that memory, and I so badly want to reach out and read what's in the book. Oh, look at that, see? And yet you can't. You can't get in there. You can only see that it's a book and you see that it's part of you, but you can't get in there to read it. That's the most frustrating thing about this. And I think, obviously it goes beyond meditation. It goes beyond certain past life regression, or even just, regression in the capacity in which we need to remember something like this.
Yeah.
It's a different sort of experience. I can't relate it to any other part of my life. Before we move forward here, I'm just gonna, because you mentioned it earlier, this is the Thyratron.
Yep.
And
I took that thing home.
What's that?
I took that thing home. We carried it painstakingly out of the base. It took like a whole day to get that thing out of there. It was so heavy.
How heavy was that thing?
It was
how many people did it take?
It was like 80 pounds, but it's it's in a small compact space. So, you're carrying it, banging into your knees, and we had two people on each handle, and they were fighting over who's, carrying it, and then so on and so forth. But we wanted to take it because it was in the book. So we made sure we got that. We took it off,
awesome.
Hid it, and then came back the second day and got it out of there.
Do you still have it?
No, it got thrown out, and I was, it's worth so much. It's not only just as like a collector's item, but history-wise, and also, if you throw it on eBay or something, I don't know. It's not worth throwing out, but it did get thrown out. I left it somewhere, and people thought they were cleaning up for me, and it's this old piece of junk, so it's sitting in the landfill somewhere.
That's okay. Unfortunate, but it's
things. Souvenirs.
It is what it is. I mean, with time, all of this stuff gets lost. It's really great to hold some of those vintage items in your hands. And in fact, when I first decided that I was going to go to Camp Hero, one of my goals, and this was many, many years ago, one of my goals was to get into Radar Tower and then just take one of the fuses out of the boxes.
Oh, yeah. That's not a bad one.
I wanted a fuse, for keepsake. But again, it draws you back. If you hold anything that is related to the site, for example, this rebar.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Or, for example, this stone. Both of these taken from Camp Hero, but I use the word taken lightly because in these circumstances, and you'll hear Mike Long Island Bigfoot talk about this too, you need to be given the
Yeah.
object. Otherwise, you could find yourself into some concern. And he's actually taken things from Camp Hero Mike and brought him back home. And all of a sudden, there's a whole bunch of nonsense happening in his house that he can't explain. So he attributes it to the object. And next thing you know, he gets it out of the house. Everything stops. I mean, we've heard this in many different ways. But when it comes to a location that's so energetically charged, like Camp Hero, you are taking an element that has other components to it in interdimensional senses just on that property, being there, okay, absorbing that energy, and it's different than perhaps just a haunted place. I mean, this, you know, the objects, again, the substance there, the material exists on many different levels within that space. And that's, again, another anomaly that I'll touch upon briefly, but you know, it's just incredible. What do you have in way of Montauk memorabilia?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a good amount of stuff, like you said, crazy things we found on the beach, and I felt like it was okay to take. Some things that I felt like were a gift, like here's a couple things here that found these 3 things in a row, and they all have this weird, like these 3 rocks, they have like a coating. I don't know if you could even see it, but there's like this weird coating on the top of each of these rocks, and one's a circle, one's a triangle, a perfect triangle, and it has like this coating on top. Same coating on all 3 rocks. I didn't find them in the same spot, but I found them in the same day, and they were like right in front of my feet. So I took these. I felt like they were like game pieces or something, maybe Native American. I'm not sure what they were, but I do, you know, I found a phone besides just rocks and stuff like that. And what I'll get to last, the film reel. I do have a piece
that's right.
the,
Somebody asked about that. I'm sorry. I think it was Area 503. I meant to throw that up. Got distracted. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so
let us know what's going on there.
Reel, I do have a piece of the LSD house too that I filmed. That when we were filming once, I looked down and it was right after they knocked it over, and it was in the same spot. So I took it's just a piece of old asphalt siding from a house, put it in my pocket. I was like, I'm keeping this as a souvenir. You know, just little things like that. But the reel to reel is amazing, and that's something Mike LIB found, and he gave it to me because he knew, you know. But I'm really, it's all of ours. We all want to know what's on it. So we're trying to find out who's somebody trustworthy and capable to restore what's on this reel to reel. But it's, I mean, when I looked into it, it's an aluminum reel. It's probably from between the year 1950 and 1970. And they used to record audio and computer data on it. So I've seen pictures of, I think it was even in the Sage control rooms where they have reel to reel recording units on the wall. So I think they were recording, could be computer data, but it also could be voice. So I'd really like to know what's on that, as a lot of us would.
Either way.
Yeah, it's dirty. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. I have a friend who has a recording studio, and he did used to go to Montauk with me. So I'm going to run it by him if he thinks it's savable and he wants to put it in his precious machine that he uses for business. He might be interested in and want to try to save it. Otherwise, I know you said you might be able to respool it. So if we could repair it, and then, you know, maybe you repair it and we give it, and if he's on board, he can try to capture it and put it onto like something we can actually play back and listen to.
Well, I mean, the reel itself was, I think, about 6 to 8 inches thick. So, I mean, that's it's a pretty deep reel for what it is. It's a quarter-inch tape. So,
it's got a lot.
I think, you know, by and large, what you're mentioning here in the way of audio or computer data, that's what we're going to find on there. I'm actually leaning more towards the computer data because if some of you guys, you tech heads, if you remember, we used to actually play on the Commodore 64. There was the games used to come on cassette tapes. So, I mean, as odd as that seemed to us at the time, they were used for that purpose for many years, especially within different factions of our military and so forth. This is just what they had available to them in the way of analog. So that would be incredible. Could you imagine? Because, you know, what they were obviously recording there, especially in the way of computer data, that could tell us so much about possibly at least the amount of power they're using. And that's always been a big question. You know, where did they get all of this power? And, you know, while we were, again, with Peter Moon, we went by a power station in Montauk, and one of the surprising things that Peter had said was that they don't even need this here. They don't need this station, so it might have something to do with Montauk. What are your thoughts on some of the surrounding power grids that you find in Montauk that clearly the town itself doesn't need that much power? What are your thoughts behind that? What could be powering it? I'm sorry, what it could be powering?
Yeah, that's the infrastructure there is there's extra infrastructure they don't need for a small, sleeping fishing village as they call it. In the summer, it's like a booming. It is in the Hamptons technically, but it's like crazy in the summer. But the base had all of its own power units, and they did use commercial power, but they built already a huge power station in Montauk for the base. And then they
Hmm.
all had each facility had its own generators. There's like generator shelters underground and generators everywhere, and
Hmm.
then commercial power. So everything was kind of already accounted for when it came to the base. They also had a coal plant on the base. And then when the Sage Radar came, they had a huge power plant with four like locomotive sized diesel engines and a huge diesel tank that was like 50 feet tall. This stuff's all gone now. I have pictures of this, but this was a huge facility. So they already had their own power. That one that we passed is weird because on August 12th, supposedly there were other blackouts. And I even have like one of Peter Moon's old Montauk Pulse newsletters where he's talking about the August
Hmm.
12th blackout. And then we go there and there's a blackout at that mysterious power station just on that very day. And then we
On
drive
August
past.
12th.
Yeah. And then there's all of these, like almost every, I would say, on like more than Montauk has, more every kind of like utility worker. There was hundreds of them, right? People there, like probably
There were
30,
so
40
many people
trucks.
lined the streets.
Yeah, it was like this major event, and we don't even know what this is for. The power station. So, um, I don't know the actual, how many gigawatts of power and the standard utilities, electric use. I really don't know much of that, but those are the kind of things I end up learning in the course of like looking into Montauk stuff, like looking into storm drains and learning about all kinds of things I never thought I would, like infrastructure. So
In your research into the Montauk Basin and those occupants that were there, I think it was you, and we spoke about this a little bit about the amount of food that might have been brought in and how they were doing this. Um, do you remember? Did we have that conversation?
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
there's
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how much they were pulling in? Because I know you had some statistics on that at least.
Well, there's this ongoing thing about these receipts that many people have found, not just me. And we went into this small, like, kitchen PX kind of where they stored all this food stuff, basically. And we were digging around, and we found in the corner there's boxes of records. So we're going through them, and one of them's got all these 1987 files, and we're looking through and we're pulling them out, and they're being shipped. It's food, like $80,000 of food on this bill, and they're being shipped to the Montauk Air Force Station, which
Mm.
was closed in 1983. And there was multiple months, multiple years, and we didn't get to look through them all. We were just randomly pulling out papers. So we came back and took a bunch of these. Of course, we were taking everything we could, and so we were taking them. And then not long after, this truck came just speeding towards us, like honking their horn. It was one of the security trucks. So we threw the papers up in the air and like ran as like a distraction. I don't know why we did that, but and then they were chasing us around the buildings. We were like literally on the other side of the building from them, and like going through. And we got away, and then so the thing is, on the internet, I keep finding people who found those receipts that I threw in that very spot. People were talking about finding them blowing and talking about finding checks for a penny from Boeing and all kinds of like huge amounts of food bills. So I started collecting these accounts online. I found like 4 or 5 different blogs or people writing online that wrote about these, finding them also. And some of them found them right where I threw them too.
That's
So
incredible.
who was ordering this much food? I started thinking maybe it's like some kind of scam. Some local restaurant was like, because one guy, there's another story where a guy finds that building, and this guy named Uncle Charlie or something comes, and he's extremely angry, and he's yelling at these people, and he stores stuff in that building or something. And he said people kept breaking in and vandalizing it and taking his stuff. So I'm thinking, was that the papers that we found that he's talking about? Is this
Hmm.
why he's all pissed? And so there's this weird thing going on with people because they tried to track that guy down, and they got different names. And he was, they were going to where he worked, and they said he was different people. It's this that's written by John Quinn, Newshawk. In case you want to read that, that's another really old thing that was on the internet since like 2001 or something like that. But then again, it's more stuff out there like tying this all together and people talking about the very things that I had in my hand. So I know it's legit in that sense.
Well, we also understand too that within the area, as it was closed to the public for quite some time, and obviously it's been opened up with live ammunition all around. So be careful where you
Yeah.
step. It
Yeah.
also had a lot of environmental issues, and you were
Yep.
there at certain points to
Yep.
film and take pictures of these enormous EPA barrels that were full of sludge and other kinds of things. What kind of chemicals did you witness them carrying out of Camp Hero?
Oh yeah, and that's footage I still are yet to put up, so we'll do that soon. But there's one piece yard where they had hundreds of barrels, and I actually had a friend who walked up and opened some of them, which was bright green stuff, which was probably antifreeze. Then there was sludge that written on some of the barrels, probably oil. Besides like PCBs, asbestos, and they have a whole bunch of fuel tanks. I have the Army Corps of Engineers report I got from Montauk Library. I read the whole thing, like took pictures, and I looked through it all, studied it, and they're looking for so many things. They don't know where half the underground structures are. They don't know where any of the fuel tanks are. They're like probing, looking for all kinds of things that are on the base. So that just goes to show you when they built this stuff, either they built it in haste in wartime, or it was so secret that they lost it. Whatever happens, they don't really know themselves. The Army doesn't know where the structures are. So that says a lot. And so there's leaking oil underground for sure. And as we were down on the beach, I don't know if you remember, but we kept finding oily, jelly and weird puddles of oil on the beach.
You could tell there was oil floating on the surface of this water trickling out from within the bluffs. Coming out of cliffs,
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's the natural caves. Shit. There's rumors of natural caves, and it's clay and sandstone, which both have the potential to make caves. And they supposedly use caves for bootlegging there that were already there, like natural. I even found a thing about when they first built the lighthouse. They used this very particular wording that said pre-existing natural resources. So I'm like, is that the natural caves that they're talking about? Because there was something about that area they said that maybe they're just talking about the peninsula itself. But, all of these things together paint a different picture, a better picture of more that happened there. So,
and just to give our listeners a quick update, in the Montauk Enigma, the full-length documentary that I had released with Brian and Long Island Bigfoot and Peter Moon, we were looking for a specific cave that Brian had found, very, very shortly before we had arrived. I think we were looking at a couple weeks or something like that. And we went, again, down to the bluffs to find this. And it just so happened that we didn't walk far enough. But you did. And what you found was that the cave that you had seen before had actually collapsed. There was a boulder in front of it. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So that's how quickly these things pop up and disappear with
right.
the deterioration and erosion there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking for any kind of cave on the beach side, like the bluff that was rumored. Because I have people I trust, that I know really well, that told me that they went into them and drank beer and stuff as kids. And I'm like, you sure you weren't talking about like an old bunker, like a piece of broken, bunker? And they're like, no, this was like a cave, like a natural cave. And they were 100% sure. They said they climbed halfway up the bluff and went into it. So I've been looking for these things forever. I find wires coming out, cement, everything. Yes. But so this one time me and Danielle were walking down the beach and we filmed inside this cave, and it went off to the left a little bit, but we didn't stick our heads in there. I had a flashlight, luckily, even in the daytime on the beach, to point in there. So you could see that there was a curve to it. So we were looking for it that day to show Peter Moon, and he had climbed up the bluff and we all followed, because that was cool to climb up the bluff with him. But another 10 feet or so, there was the cave. I went looking for it. I didn't see it that day. I passed it. I went down like 500 feet and then ran back. And so I slowed down the old video, and matched them up. And in that very spot where it's supposed to be, I noticed there's the shape of the cave, and there's this rock like right in the middle of the cave, just boulder stuck in the entrance. So like you said, it came and went, and I don't know how far it goes in, but.
Well, I mean, if you guys want to see this cave, you can. Just go to Montauk is Strange and check out the video. He does a full exploration of that area, and he does show the entrance. It looked like, I think, and I'd mentioned this before, it looked like it went back a little ways. How deep do you think the cave was, if you were to estimate?
It went in like 2 or 3 feet, and then it looked like it turned to the left. So from what we can see, maybe like a total of 4 or 5 feet of total space forward, with the bend included. So, and it was only like chest high. So you'd have to bend forward a little to get into it. From there, I don't know where it goes, but I think the caves are extensive, judging by all the water that pours out of the cliffs and all the plants growing on the cliff from fresh water, and all the rumors. And, the things that we've seen inside Battery 216, maybe something's collapsing from underneath, and that's why things are falling, into like that big hole that you'll see on tomorrow's premiere. The story that Dark Hour Paranormal reads for me. It's the first, field report into this bunker, and there's a giant hole in there. So that could be another reason. It could be a natural collapse, but I've kind of ruled that out. But it's not impossible. So
Yeah, no, I would
just has
agree. Well, I mean, it's funny too because we had spoken a little bit about this before, and obviously, when I sat down with Peter Moon after we had walked up the bluffs, we were hot as hell, and we decided to sit down, and you guys were still traipsing up, and he had mentioned that obviously Montauk being such a magical place in certain respects, there have been people who have seen openings that have been there one day and then the very next they're not. But
Yeah.
not many cases wherein the actual topography of the surrounding area had changed, wherein what you found was a stone in front of there, you could still recognize what it was.
Yeah.
When these people talk about it, and again, it's seen en masse by many people at one time who then concur off-site. They all had this experience. They all saw this object, or they saw a structure or an opening, and then somebody goes back the next day, or even themselves, they go to the exact same spot, and it's just like nothing had ever been there before. It was just completely natural, untouched. So you have to wonder, again, when it comes to these portals or these areas of thinner veiling, if you will, what really happens, and to what degree do we have access to these? I mean, how natural is it for us to use these, or are we so far out of our element and have been for so many years that we've forgotten and may take many years and other lessons to get to the point where we're afforded the opportunity to learn about that again? It's very curious, my friend.
That is very curious. Maybe that's how people accidentally wander into some of them. If we're talking like almost missing 411 kind of, notion, maybe people are accessing them unintentionally too. That could be along with what you said, but
I think it's possible. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying it's a great topic. I mean, you can go all over with, Montauk. Basically, it connects to many things.
Well, it's possible. We don't really have a quantification to say where does one timeline begin and where does one timeline end? What part of space and time does this timeline occupy? And then how does it interact or not interact with other timelines around it or similar, parallel, whatever. All we know is that they do exist. And there is actually some science for these multi-dimensions that we won't get into now. But with a little bit of research, you guys can certainly find these concepts the way that they're proposed. I happen to believe in certain respects. I always use a different word, but sometimes belief is appropriate. I believe that there may be some intermeshing of those frequencies that, yes, you can walk into a specific space and you're actually outside of the time or the area that you actually came into, although things look similar, you're actually dodging through. When you look at timelines and you talk about the choices and decisions that you make every day, every single decision, every single moment, you are then laying another domino in the road that you are following to create and forge this path. It doesn't necessarily mean that you had a distinct path before, predestined, you're going to take step by step the way you planned. It's actually the other way around. You're creating what the timeline is. It's very, I bring it back to a stringed instrument. It's very much like, let's say, a guitar. It's latent within its energy and experience while it's just sitting there and nobody's playing it. If you pick it up and you start going up the scale and you go down, you create a song. Okay, let's just talk about linearity for a moment. This is now representative of your life. These are the decisions and choices you made to move your fingers, the strings that you wanted to pluck, and then sure enough, that song is your life. Now, let's talk about reincarnation very briefly. Same concept. So after you're done playing that song, you put the guitar down. We're back to, homeostasis. So then you pick up the guitar, you play a different song. Well, that's a different life that you've lived. It's still on the same instrument within the same paradigm, but you're now experiencing a different angle or a facet of that reality. I think that's very close in the way of how we might be able to describe our experiences here in the physical, but still being multidimensional beings as we exist. And then, of course, what happens beyond that, again, possibilities and context is all there.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe, in time being linear, or if you think it's all happening now, it's always now. Like right now, it's now. In a second, it'll be now. Whenever we experience it, it's now. But everything may be happening at once too, past, present, and future, and it's hard for us to understand because we experience life as a series of moments in
Correct.
sequentially, but really it's, it may be all at once. There may be no time, as we know, but then where do other dimensions fit in? So it gets complicated from there.
If you were sitting in the living room watching something on television and your wife is in the kitchen making dinner, you're more than likely focused on the television show. You're engaged. You're, emotionally involved in this. You might have the awareness that, what your wife's in there. You occasionally hear a pot ding or the water go on. But if you were to have the awareness and sustain the awareness that she was in there and follow every move, almost as if you were experiencing it yourself, but still on the outside, you're understanding at that point the now, okay? Our brains are really where time comes in, because if you want to define time, it's really the quantification and observance of entropy within ourselves and around us. And yet entropy, although it's obviously very integral to the universe and the way that it works, it's still within the moment. Just because change happens doesn't mean that something else doesn't arise out of that entropy, and you have anti-entropy.
You're
There's
right.
there's another word for it, but it's what it is. It's an anti-entropy. But again, my whole point here is that the time, the way that we perceive it linearly and straightforward, is really a construct of our mind to sort of save us from all the stimulus of the now weighing in on us when we don't have yet the developed tools to perceive that, anchor it, and still stay stable within our particular focus or our paradigm.
Yeah, it's definitely to keep us sane, our own built-in filters. I agree with that. And there seems to be a direction to it. Like you said, like it's with entropy, things fall apart. They don't come back together. So there seems to be a direction to time also, which is kind of enforces the linear thing. But like you said, there's the quantum mechanics thing. So we're choosing, everything we choose becomes what it is. There's a lot of possibilities around us, but as you look at something, you choose it to be there, so on and so forth. So mixing all those theories together, that's probably where you'll find a part of the answer.
I love it, dude.
Them together.
Absolutely love it. And you know what? This is what we're doing, not only here at Dark Hour Paranormal or over at Montauk is Strange. We're doing this on Third Phase of Moon. We're doing this on GoofOn. We're doing this on Dr. J Radio Live. We're doing this on Apollo Asteria's show. In fact, we'll be doing it tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. I'll be over there with Apollo, and we'll be talking at large, I believe, about the paranormal, but you know how it goes. We're going to take it in all different directions. But, hey, listen, Brian, we are now at the bottom of the hour. I want to thank you for coming on the show, brother. Before we go, can you let us know? Of course, you guys can check the description below. There is a link to Brian's channel, but can you let us know where we can find you, and if people can get in contact with you? Yeah, please dole us out with that as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for watching. And Montauk is Strange is my channel on YouTube. You can email me if you have some kind of information or you just want to ask me a question at montaukisstrange@gmail.com. And other than that, I try to, put out something about once a week, maybe more. And we try to go out there as many times as possible. The only reason I haven't gone right now is I'm fixing my car, but we will be going soon. And anything Montauk related, feel free to contact me. I'm totally interested in hearing it.
Well, Brian, I can't express the gratitude that I hold for you, your research, your excellence in way of critical thinking, clarity, and analysis, man. Honestly, you deserve every accolade because there aren't many people who are out there doing this at the level that you're doing it with the organization that you've put behind it. I mean, I sat and I looked at some of those folders with you. There wasn't a note out of place. Everything was, exactly the way you had intended to be, whether it was chronological or otherwise. Man, you are perfectly organized within your research that anybody could pick this up and have a full understanding about what you've put together. And, by the way, guys, if you ever find yourself out in the woods with Brian Minnick, fear not. This man has an answer and a tool for every situation you will ever get yourself into. Natural survivalist over here. But thank you once again, Brian. I appreciate you. Of course, we'll have you back on sooner than later. But for the meantime here, I'm going to take you off the show and hang out backstage. I'll say my proper goodbyes. If you have to go, I understand that as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much, man.
Take care.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed our show tonight. I had a fantastic time. I always love discussing this subject because most of the time, as you do, you start pulling up other things. You start ruminating and you start really lamenting on things you've researched, and you get different interpretations as you continue to talk about some of these subjects. And I find that Montauk, the ever-encompassing and all-expansive project and subject that it is at large, it's just going to continue to inflate until we have a little bit more transparency, albeit much too late. But nonetheless, it will be pertinent for us to understand that moving forward, how we would conduct ourselves differently, given the understanding and information that we already have and may be able to give to the public at large in another capacity. I'm tripping over my words. I've been working since 11 o'clock this morning, guys. I apologize. But yes, I think you understand where I'm going with all of this. So we're going to keep Montauk at the helm. It will be there until things are resolved in one way, shape, or form. I'll continue to research it. Brian will do the same. And of course, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email myself at Dark Hour Paranormal Live, or you can email Brian, and he had given you, I think it's montaukisstrange@gmail.com. That's also, mine was also at gmail.com. Go ahead and shoot us an email, and we will certainly get back to you on this. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the moderators. I appreciate the super chats, and I appreciate all of your presence within these shows. It makes it absolutely enjoyable, and the energy that you guys bring into these chats is wonderful. I'm sorry I can't get to all of you. I know I apologize about this, but when we have these interviews, that is certainly the focus, but I in no way negate you being here, and I see each and every one of you. Thank you once again, guys. So I guess for the time being here, let me pull up the outro. I should have done that. Didn't plan very well, but we'll get to it. Yeah, so as I said, tomorrow night I'll be with Apollo. There is something that I want to mention very quickly to you, and I want you to take this as you do. From Third Phase of Moon, we have been given some very inside information that something big is coming. Now, we hear this a lot, and something that we discuss amongst ourselves, but the source that this particular information is coming from is very unorthodox, and it's certainly a rare situation, and in this respect we are keeping our heads turned in that direction because of that. So without saying too much, let's say between now and the next couple months, you may see something very large and impactful happen in way of public awareness dealing with ufology, extraterrestrials, or UFOs and technology at large. We don't really know exactly what it's going to be, but I want to give you guys the heads up and keep your eye out, as we all are. All right, guys, we will return, I think, on Thursday. I do have a couple people coming up here that I'm very excited about, but I'm going to leave that for the moment and surprise you all when the time is right. All right, guys, thanks once again for being here. Until next time, stay inquisitive, stay curious, and hey, just like Third Phase of Moon says, keep your eyes to the skies. And if you ain't looking up, you ain't looking out for ufology, as Rich from Goofon says. See, I'm just stealing other people's taglines now. I still haven't come up with my own, so that's what we're doing. I'm giving credit. Giving credit. All right, folks. Have yourselves a good night. Stay safe. And we'll see you next time. Ciao.